Out of the near indiscernible madness that is Beau is afraid have come a lot of theories on what this bizarre nightmare experience is really trying to tell us, with some of the most popular approaches being to speculate on what may or may not be literally real within the world of the movie. Maybe Beau died when that truck hit him and the rest of the movie is his purgatory before being sent to hell. Or maybe this is all just one big, weird anxiety dream Beau's having the night before he has to catch his flight to see his mother. Or maybe what's really happening is it's all just some newborn baby being slapped in his newborn ass while imagining he's an alternate universe Joaquin Phoenix with ostrich egg-sized balls.
Your testicles are significantly distended.
Or something like that. Well, I'm here to tell you in full confidence that these theories are definitely and definitively, without question, maybe correct? Who am I to say? I'm just a dude on YouTube. All I can say is that I personally feel deconstructing this movie in these terms is a bit of an overcomplication and an overall distraction from understanding a movie that is, for the most part, meant to be analyzed through what it's showing us at face value, while also giving one final word to a collection of reoccurring themes that were introduced in writer-director Ari Aster's first two films, Hereditary and Midsommar, with Beau is Afraid acting as the conclusion to his connected thematic trilogy, lassoing together all his ideas and sending them off in one epically cynical slap to our stupid faces.
Ow!
So let's talk about Beau is Afraid and why the deeper subtext we can extract from this hilariously weird 3-hour experience gives us a lot more to chew on than
It's all a dream.
Yeah, just a dream.
But first, Beau is Afraid follows Mona Wassermann, a selfish asshole who disappoints everyone around him, including this hungry homeless man who just needs his help. Next, the unpredictable sociopath known as Beau decides to spend his night picking fights with his neighbors instead of getting a good night's sleep before a flight to visit his loving mother, Mona, in the morning. As a result, he ends up obliterating poor Mona's dreams with the tired old "I overslept and my luggage and keys were stolen" excuse. Rather than resolve the easy-to-resolve issue like any good boy who loves his mother would, Beau instead takes prescription drugs to escape his feelings of debilitating anxiety or something. But the dipshit known as Beau doesn't have water to swallow his pills, so he runs across the street to purchase some while making a big fuss about paying the convenience store clerk who just needs to feed his family.
Don't curse me, my friend. I'm not the one.
Then Beau gets even more fussy about a few homeless people using his wide-open apartment for a little shut-eye, despite the fact that they leave it just as they found it the next morning.
Hello?
Next, Beau tries to call his mother, the one he disappointed, only to be informed that upon hearing of her son's failure to catch his flight, she was crushed in the head by a chandelier.
It looks like it dropped off the ceiling and it fell and it smashed her head. It's like it's evaporated.
Being the self-serving creature that he is, Beau reacts to the news by having bath time, only to find that his gigantic balloon balls frighten the man on his ceiling, which causes Beau to get overly dramatic and upset a friendly neighborhood police officer, who's left no choice but to shoot at Beau for being such a cheese brain. Lucky for Beau, a truck pushes him out of the way of the bullets. And even luckier, the truck is driven by a kind Samaritan named Grace, who along with her hipster husband Roger, agree to let the brainless bonehead invade their home while his injuries heal. So after being informed that his mother can't be buried before his arrival,
The burial has been outrageously postponed.
and receiving the greatest advice of his life,
You need to stop the humiliation.
Beau decides he's above it all and just sits around making puzzles and doing illegal drugs with teenage girls.
Can you die from this? What?
One of which is Grace and Roger's lovely daughter Tony, who can see right through Beau's flimsy victim facade.
Would you like to trade?
Shut my door and get in my bed.
She's also good friends with the insane veteran orphan of the family, who wants to murder Beau. And when Roger barely even suggests the idea of postponing his promise to drive Beau to Mona's funeral,
This is your decision.
Beau is delighted as can be to accept any delay, because he's evil. After a lot of lounging around and having drug-induced memories from being a teenager with the best mom a boy can have, in his bed, and meeting his first and only love, Elaine, who tried to take Beau from mommy's bedside like a bad girl so was never heard from again,
Wait for me, okay? Oh my god!
Beau decides doing arts and crafts with Tony is perfectly acceptable in her emotional state.
You can't get fucking f***ed up with me! No!
And since Beau doesn't take teenage depression seriously, Tony's easily preventable death is all over his stupid pajamas. which leaves Grace sad, and with no choice but to defend herself from the ravaging maniac known as Beau.
I'll kill you! I'll kill you!
So Beau hightails it out of there faster than he could blame anyone else for his dim-witted decisions. While escaping into the forest like a coward, Beau comes across a bunch of dirty hippies who'd rather play pretend in the woods than participate in Mona's simulation. I mean society.
I'm in Kansas.
So Beau watches the smelly forest hippies as they put on a play that really sucks him in, making him feel like a courageous and important man, even though he's a scared and impotent child. In this illusion known as every inept man's fantasy, Sigma Beau has a totally hot wife. And even better, he actually puts those inappropriately large bazooka balls to use and produces 3 children. But Sigma Beau gets tragically separated from his family in stormy weather that looks like it was directed by the Daniels, leaving him feeling trumped by life, and in time, reduced to an old bag of bones trying to find his Figment family. When old man Sigma Beau finally comes across his 3 boys at the play within the play he's hallucinating he's playing a part in, a tearful family reunion gets weird as he recalls what his unconditionally loving mother told him long ago, that finishing off would finish him off. For good. And it's all thanks to Beau's dad, who passed away while passing this trait to Beau.
He died on our wedding night, the same night you were conceived. He had a heart murmur, just like you.
That's when Beau remembers he's really just a sack of useless turd watching a play in a forest. Meanwhile, Jeeves, the aforementioned insane veteran, has been on Beau's smelly loser scent all along, and arrives just in time to blow up his whole spot. So Beau jets out of there faster than anyone can say, "Own up to your responsibilities, coward." Beau then arrives home to find that he missed his own mother's funeral, and then takes a nap to show how much he cares. But even worse, when the love of his life who he hasn't seen since childhood shows up, he seduces her with his man-boyish good looks, and then takes her upstairs to bake the potato in his dead mom's bed, breaking the promise he made to her to never empty his enormous ogre balls under any circumstances, or under her favorite linen either, which makes Mommy very angry.
Mommy's very angry.
So angry that she turns Elaine to stone and steps out from the shadows to reveal she's been alive all along. And Beau's in big trouble. After getting a much-deserved roasting for being a thorn in his mother's ass for far too long,
even when you were a baby, you rejected me and refused to breastfeed.
Beau finally puts together that Mona's had her helpful hands in just about every aspect of his life since childhood, thanks in part to her henchman therapist who Beau told everything to in confidence. Except he's not confident, so that doesn't make any sense. Mona then graciously offers to show Beau what really happened to his father because he won't stop whining about it.
Do you want the truth now?
Yes!
So she escorts him up to the attic where Beau finally meets his dad, who's just a huge dick, which makes Beau crawl right back to the comfort of Mommy's feet. And when Mona applies just the slightest discipline to her spoiled, rotten son, he thanks her by killing her. So Beau escapes the crime scene because owning up to one's actions is for the honorable. But it's all good in the MW-owned hood because this has all been one big, elaborate test that Beau was just too stupid to pass. So now it's time to hear from Beau's defense attorney, who really needs to shut up now. And when irrefutable evidence is presented that Beau, you know what, having heard enough, we just want to see the spineless little jellyfish die now. So we watch the spineless little jellyfish die now because that's how justice works.
What do you think I should do? What do you think I should do?
I'm sure you'll do the right thing, sweetheart.
The defining thematic pillars of Beau is Afraid can also be found in writer-director Ari Aster's first 2 films, Hereditary and Midsommar, both of which feature a cast of characters completely unaware that they're all just puppets on a predetermined track, headed straight for annihilation. And it's not until the end in all 3 of these movies that we finally understand the full scope of this grand design. Hereditary introduces a family whose grandmother very recently passed away. And from there, as tragedy only continues to strike the family head on, we're equally as unaware as they are that these seemingly random, unfortunate events were carefully pre-constructed by the grandmother and the cult she belonged to long before the movie even started. A fact we become fully aware to by the very end, after every member of the family has been viciously sacrificed. Likewise, Midsommar tracks Danny, who after tragically losing her sister and parents to a murder-suicide, goes on a trip with her boyfriend and his friends to a small communal village in Sweden to partake in a midsummer celebration. But it's not until the climax of the movie that we come to realize this is no commune. It's a cult, and the entire group of core characters were manipulated into joining the festivities so they could either be used and discarded for their rituals, or in Danny's case, indoctrinated into their cute little flower cult. Beau is Afraid is the culmination of this all-encompassing concept wrapped up in one extra-large surrealistic nightmare extravaganza. This time, the puppet master is more powerful and imposing than ever before, as Mona is revealed in the climax to not only have been manipulating almost every step of her son's journey, but also possesses a seemingly godlike authority over the very reality the movie exists within. If the central ideas of all three movies could be boiled down to one philosophy, it's determinism. The notion that free will is just an illusion created out of human ignorance. That every action we take or choice we make is guided by something external to our own perceived will.
Meaning Heracles never had any choice, right? So does that make it more tragic or less tragic than if he has a choice?
I think it's more tragic. If it's all just inevitable, then that means that the characters had no hope. They never had hope because they're all just like hopeless. They're all like pawns in this horrible, hopeless machine.
Hereditary is well known for its expression of this idea through not only emphasizing the mother Annie's miniature diorama sculptures throughout, but also with several shots that make the family themselves and their surrounding environment look like small dollhouse models. The most famous of which is the opening shot that zeroes in on one of Annie's dioramas until it becomes the literal house most of the movie is set in. And while this filmmaking aesthetic isn't quite as prevalent in Midsommar and Beau, there are still a fair number of shots that capture this perspective throughout those movies as well, communicating that though we may think we possess some semblance of self-governance, we are really more like the Toy Story toys if they didn't have the ability to come to life when Andy wasn't doing what he pleased with them. Furthermore, all three movies are set into motion by the foreboding presence of an inescapable family lineage. Each movie circles back to this idea that the genetic line we were born into is cause for our deterministic destruction, that we have no control over our own ancestry and therefore have no choice in the horrors that get passed down to us. And in the case of the main characters in all of Aster's movies, that means a bleak end by way of family members who were only trying their best to destroy them. Annie and the rest of the Hereditary fam are tragically unaware of the power and influence their newly deceased grandmother has over their destiny. Out of her selfish desire to be rewarded with riches in the afterlife, she set her family up to all be sacrificed so a hell demon could become corporeal, which is just really inconsiderate. The downfall of the Hereditary characters is all owed to an elder of the family whose darkness was seeded into their bloodline long before it sprung their ruin. In Danny's case, it's her sister's haunting actions that reshape her into a much darker version of herself. After her sister does herself and their parents in, Danny is left without a family, which leads to her clinging to a relationship with her boyfriend that was all but over, which leads to her visiting Sweden with her boyfriend and his friends, which leads to her finding a new family in a cult and participating in their murderous rituals. And just a quick side note, this outcome is actually a little more complex in that Danny goes from depressed and without a family to happy and taken in by a new family. So at least from Danny's own perspective, it could be argued as something of a positive ending in its own weird way. But still, from a broader moral standpoint, used to not participate in murder, now participates in murder. For Beau, his downfall is rigged by his mother, who both shaped him into the anxiety-paralyzed man-child he grew to be while simultaneously resenting him for not overcoming that crippling incapacity she bestowed upon him.
You've always acted like some dutiful, doting little boy, as if it's throwing me off some scent.
And as it turns out, Mona is only repeating the cycle of abuse passed down by her mother.
My own mother wouldn't even touch me. I wasn't worthy of her love. I hadn't earned it. And I never earned it.
And Mona buried the side of Beau that possessed any sort of independence, that she saw as a threat to his complacence, or as she would describe it, love, because it's what she did to herself in an attempt to please her mother.
No matter how much of my deepest, real self I smothered until it was dead, none of it mattered.
Perhaps the most intriguing part of arriving at this final stop of a Dower Trilogy bus tour is that while Hereditary and Midsommar are hard-boiled horror movies, Beau is Afraid is at best horror adjacent, most commonly and aptly referred to as a nightmare comedy. And its hilarious stubbornness over evolving or arriving at some kind of breakthrough in terms of ideas explored over the course of these three movies paints Ari Aster as mockingly disinterested in any thematic growth.
She blamed me for everything her mother did to her.
But we'll get more into that later. Not only do all three movies feature a grim spiraling with thanks to family heritage, they more specifically feature the feminine as the force behind this inevitable rock bottom. The immediate family of Hereditary and Beau are all done in by the sins of the very powerful matriarchal mother. Midsommar is a slight variation on this, as it essentially acts as Dani's origin story for becoming the woman in the position of power of the tribe by the end of that story. When she graduates to lead flower child of her colorful cult family, she's granted the authority to cast a death sentence onto the closest person she had to family prior to assimilating with her new one. Just as Dani's boyfriend suffers the consequences of not being fitting enough for her familial needs, so too does the family in Hereditary for not meeting their grandmother's material needs in the same way her cult promises to. And so too does Beau for being the worst son the world has ever known, allegedly. It's through Mona that this imposing god-tier feminine power in all of Ari's movies reaches a peak all-knowingness, and ultimately comes to be understood as a point of no escape.
Mona, who was petrified of squirrels. Beau, who has elected not to be present with us today.
Regardless of if the world the movie takes place in is literally real or a dream or a sadistic cry for help from a mentally tortured director, I think our best bet at understanding this whole ordeal is to look at it as a metaphorical expression of the internal state of an anxious man-boy named Beau. Mona is the all-seeing goddess of this plane of reality, whatever it may be, and as we take this pilgrimage with Beau to his mother's alleged funeral, we begin to realize, just as Beau seems to be beginning to realize, that everything he is and all that he knows has been shaped by his mother's suffocating grasp over him, which is given subtle visualization through a handful of shots where Mona is shown holding young Beau's tiny head. From a portrait of Mona's fingers wrapped around little baby Beau's little baby skull, to the towering statue in front of her home of her tightly cradling Beau, and a flashback of her scratching shampoo into Beau's scalp, it's a small way of showing that Mona has hooked her talons into the deepest parts of Beau's mind since birth, possessing total control over her son's psychology. And the movie can pretty much be distilled down to an exploration of how a warped psyche can shape a person's entire waking life. We're at the whims of whatever parental and environmental surrounding we just so happen to pop into existence with. And in Beau's case, he was placed into an environment with the gold standard of emotionally manipulative, narcissistic mothers.
Your keys are stolen. That's terrible.
They were stolen.
We'll just do another visit another time. I can even come to you so it's not such a pain.
As a result, Beau's entire adult reality is a simulation created by his mother. And while that's a fitting figurative description for many people living with this kind of childhood trauma, in this whacked out trip of a movie, it's the literal reality Beau has to deal with day to day. Mona is the eye of guilt in the sky above Beau, looking down on the little ant she created, offended by its inability to provide unfettered devotion. Beau was trained like a dog from childhood to seek out the impossibly high standards of Mona's love, to find self-assurance only from her approval, of which she almost never seems willing to give, rather than to find it within himself.
Okay, sweetheart, I understand.
Wait, what's okay? No, it's not. What do you understand?
In a way, Mona is like Dr. Frankenstein, but instead of creating a force of destruction she can't control, she creates a frightened shell of a man whose inaction she can't control. And her overwhelming disappointment and berating only ironically reaffirms Beau's lack of courage.
You spent your whole life asking every half-wit you could find, if I do this, can I avoid this, or will that happen? As if you were born without the mechanism to choose.
The entire movie is one big over-the-top manipulative test by Mona to see if Beau can find the strength to please her to her satisfaction.
What do you think I should do? What do you think I should do?
To see if her son can lift himself out of a difficult situation with the guiding intention of making Mother happy.
I'm sure you'll do the right thing, sweetheart.
But Beau is too immobilized by his malicious surroundings. Everyone in this world is hostile and asserts power and control over Beau like he's nothing.
You're
even when he's at his weakest and most vulnerable. Because from a psychological perspective, this is how a person who's suffered this level of abuse from a parent might process the world, as antagonistic and mean and impossible to have any say over because that was all they knew in their childhood, an incessant thought pattern of powerlessness their mind was programmed to run on. The punchline of the whole thing being that it's not all in this subject's head. Beau's mother really is puppeteering his surroundings and making everyone around him a threat to his well-being. It's all one big hellish reality Beau is fatefully unable to escape from. Among all the odd, dreamlike glimpses of Beau's childhood we get throughout the movie, like Mona's very strange and practically sexually charged gatekeeping of Beau's interest in any woman other than herself, the most integral to shaping Beau into who he becomes is the flashback of Mona banishing child Beau's twin, or clone, or doppelganger, or what have you, to the attic. This was the part of Beau that had some fight in him, that had the will to stand up for himself.
Didn't I say I wasn't going to do this again with you tonight?
Demanding his mother tell him where his father is rather than just roll over and comply to her demands.
Where's Daddy?
Are you trying to hurt me?
I don't care, I want Daddy.
As we know, Beau's father is a gigantic chode who's been exiled to the attic himself. More on that in a minute. But in a metaphorical sense, this whole scenario of Mona locking this version of Beau in the attic is reflective of a traumatic childhood incident that triggered Beau to suppress the part of himself with independence and agency due to the punishment he endured for daring to show this side of himself.
You want Daddy too?
Thus, for the remainder of his life, Beau is left only with the part of himself that lives to keep his mother happy out of fear of the terrifying consequences. This fear resides deep within his subconscious, only bubbling back up in Beau's dreams. From this perspective, the attic represents a place of mental suppression, of a powerful memory stowed away with the intention of being forgotten, yet its presence still remains, festering in the dark and awaiting acknowledgement. This trope was also used in Hereditary, where it's discovered that Annie's mother's corpse was contained in the attic throughout the movie, symbolizing the effect of her passing on the family. A part of their lineage they believed was behind them for good, yet was still lingering, hidden in the dark and securing their demise all along. Just as well, Beau's father being just a fleshy plonker in the attic is not only a huge comedic swing, but also a grander than grand display of Beau's emasculation. Whether this flailing hunk of man-meat with a face is literally real or not, the point is that Mona suppressed any semblance of manhood in Beau's life. From a dad who was shunned away from being a role model of masculinity, to ensuring with a ridiculous lie that he'd never be allowed the relief of discharging his very pent-up nutter butter.
He died.
Ow.
By finishing into me.
Mona colored her son's entire reality with her own very toxic and very subjugating brand of femininity, adding all new meaning to the phrase, having them by the balls. While Mona's presence in the movie primarily points to Beau's broken beyond repair psychology, it also packs with it an air of modern authoritarianism. Mona herself is an embodiment of a powerful governing organization, a mother figure meant to control and safeguard. And in this world, Mona's mega conglomerate empire, MW Industries, appears to hold ownership over just about everything, including the movie itself, as her corporate logo sneakily appears at the very beginning, which certainly explains her goddess-like control over the movie's reality, of which she seems capable of shifting and shaping to her advantage as she pleases. From just about every commercial and product shown, to the very apartments Beau lives in, Mona is an inescapable enterprise that emphasizes protection. And from the psychological end of the spectrum, this of course even further reiterates Mona's control over Beau's perception. But on the social commentary end, it provides a rather hilariously bleak reflection of corporate or government authoritarianism, because through her all-powerful manipulation, she poses herself as the great caretaker, the provider of safety and security for the people. The hordes of disenfranchised people, death-infested streets, and general madness infecting the lowest levels of the society? No need to worry about that. The great MW has it all under control. Shut up and just take some more of her prescription drugs to feel better. Through Beau, Mona's overbearing authority is called into question. With his journey comes the realization that maybe he can gain his independence after burying his mother and putting her behind him for good. But Mother expects unmoving compliance in her rigged reality. And a questioning, or even worse, a defiance against her authority, is a transgression worthy of the highest punishment. With just the right cherry-picking of Beau's past and how it can be linked to defining his overall character, Mona controls the narrative, and in her court of public perception, she's the victim and Beau's the aggressor. In a world where Mona has so selflessly bestowed some much-needed structure upon a public that's oh so helpless without her guidance, there's no room for non-compliance, unappreciative of the great privileges she provides.
I'll call the police.
Oh, look, I'm paying.
20 now.
Oh, God.
I'm not the one.
When it comes to Mona's final judgment scene, many have speculated that ending the movie on Beau's death as a large audience watches indifferently before slowly shuffling out as the credits roll is meant to reflect, in a meta sense, us as we all leave the theater after having watched a man suffer for 3 straight hours. As if Ari Aster saying, "You took part in watching this man's demise, and now I'm pointing the camera at you, you big goof." And while this may be true in a sense, I think there's a little more meat on the bone of what that's meant to imply. While the movie in large part embodies the feeling of a Kafkaesque nightmare, more on that in the 9 o'clock hour, keeping to the social commentary side of the spectrum, we can also look at this off-putting world as a rendering of our current day and age, with the dial turned all the way up to extreme nightmare feeling. With the convenience of instant access to the entire world through our phones has come with it a sensory overload on the scale the human race has never before experienced. And this entire movie can be boiled down to one gigantic slab of sensory overload. With what seems like an unlimited abundance of exceedingly bizarre Easter eggs and reoccurring background characters littered throughout every corner of so many frames, the point probably isn't to provide a secret code to be unlocked by a swarm of hungry Redditors, but to instead extend the feeling of chaos. An unhinged, unfocused, anxiety-burdening chaos factory of a world that's virtually impossible to untangle and make any logical sense of. And with this chaos comes the need for the illusion of order, the illusion of understanding through a well-presented narrative. Not unlike gladiatorial times, we so often watch through the prism of our phones as people are put under the public spotlight of judgment. We yearn to gather around communally to be fed an easily digestible story of justice, a meaningfulness to be extracted out of all the threatening disorder. While we may not partake in the indifferent observance of a literal murder of a person, at least not most of us anyway, a character assassination that's defended cogently enough by way of an exceptionally loud microphone is all too often deemed fair game to be enjoyed with an extra large tub of extra salty popcorn. Beau can be seen as the embodiment of a very modern and very over-the-top societal anxiety, of a subconscious undercurrent of fear of being publicly picked apart and put on trial with the lousiest of defenses that nobody cares to hear, and drowning in the forced submergence of our assigned guilt.
I have videos of you. I'll post them. I'll say what you did. What did I do? What did I do?
And despite having its fair share of these modern societal illusions peppered throughout, guilt and shame are really the core pillars of this entire shindig. By now, the number of influences on the movie have been repeated to death, from Charlie Kaufman to The Truman Show to the deepest cuts of the Criterion Collection that we all love, to pretend we've seen. But what is clearly the most influential to Beau is Afraid, or more accurately, the most interesting to me, so I'm deeming it the most influential, are the works of writer Franz Kafka. Kafka had a very unique philosophy on life. That it sucks. His writings, which are nearly all over 100 years old now, convey a nightmarish oppressiveness, almost always taking place in a cruel and senseless reality of which the main character is a sad little plaything in the hands of some greater, often completely unknowable, authority. This was all reflective of Kafka's internal state. A man who lived with a constant feeling of dreadful discomfort and paranoia, which was largely connected to his father, who was a terrifying and emotionally abusive tyrant in Kafka's eyes. While many have cited Kafka's most popular novels like The Metamorphosis and The Trial as most influential to Beau's plot and tone, I fancy myself a contrarian edgelord, and therefore think Kafka's very short 3-sentence story titled Little Fable captures the writer's impact on the movie exceptionally, which goes a little something like this. "Alas," said the mouse, "the whole world is growing smaller every day. At the beginning it was so big that I was afraid. I kept running, and I was glad when I saw walls far away to the right and left. But these long walls have narrowed so quickly that I'm in the last chamber already. And there in the corner stands the trap that I'm running into. You only need to change your direction," said the cat, and ate it up.
I ate him right the f*** up, and it felt f***ing
great.
It's not just the existentially weighted deterministic trap of being a helpless little mouse in a maze leading straight to death that aligns Kafka's little fable so acutely with Beau's, or the idea of the cat, who, like Mona, tells the powerless little rodent that he has the autonomy to change direction while simultaneously devouring the poor little guy. It's above all else the sheer absurdity of life captured in such harsh and hilariously blunt terms. The very function of a fable is to speak to some higher moral truth, to elicit a sense of justice by imparting power and wisdom to the meek. Instead, the whole thing's just one big punchline. The lesson being, life's like reading a fable in hope of extracting a deeper meaning out of it, only to reach the end and realize, joke's on you, clown. Rather than arrive at this sentiment as quickly as possible, Beau is Afraid instead goes for broke with the extremely long-winded. The movie isn't a short and to-the-point fable, but an epic Odyssean journey, and an utterly fruitless one at that. If you've looked any further past just watching the movie itself, you've probably come across Aster's quote about Beau is Afraid being a Jewish Lord of the Rings, but the main character's just trying to get to his mom's house. And sticking to that idea, the movie is one big, darkly comedic subversion of the classic tales of hope and fortitude, of the narrative archetype of the hero's journey, where a character leaves the safety of their home behind to go on an adventure, overcomes a series of long and arduous challenges along the way, and finally returns home in the end a wiser and more knowledgeable person than they were at the beginning. Beau is Afraid is fully aware that we're conditioned to expect this classic plot structure, and is happy to decimate those expectations with disturbing delight. Aster has said he constructed the movie like a hall of mirrors.
I tried to design it in some ways as like this very long hall of mirrors.
And these mirrors are a constant reiterating and reflecting of Beau's powerlessness, of his inescapable guilt and shame due to his mother. And instead of arriving at a finish line of freedom from his lifelong oppression, the movie ends no different than it began, with Beau unable to escape his mother's control over him. It's an extra spicy slap to our sad faces when Beau finally acts his ball size and retaliates against his mother in the climax, seemingly killing her in a blind rage. He jumps into that little boat and takes off into uncharted waters, into a new world, free from his mother. He's finally defeated his dragon, and as he enters that cave and exits out the other side, he looks up at the beautiful starry night. The music turns profound, and Beau seems to have finally reached a never-before-felt sense of peace. The hero's journey has been completed. But it's all one big Kafkaesque kick to his gargantuan gonads, as those stars of freedom are revealed to be more eyes of judgment eager to passively partake in Beau's punishment. The movie begins with Beau passing through his mother's birth canal and entering into a cruel world out to get him. And 3 hours later, it ends the same way, with Beau entering yet another very similarly shaped canal meant to signify rebirth, only to find it's yet another entrance into his mother's cruel arena of condemnation. No great hurdle overcome, no lesson learned, just one very long-winded experience of watching a man unable to overcome his suffering. Joke's on us. Anyway, let's check in on Grace and Roger, shall we?
Hey, Kai.
Contender for the most excruciatingly Kafkaesque section of the movie is when Beau finds himself stuck in that suburban mousetrap. If anything dredges up the extremely strange experience of a nightmare, it's the sense of knowing you need to be somewhere urgently, but feeling weighed down, like a helpless infant incapable of proper communication or action, as if you're operating at a lower resolution than everyone else.
But what does this mean? Wait, well, what does that mean?
In retrospect, we know this entire setup is all a part of Mona's simulation, and that Grace and Roger are employees of the great MW, and Grace, for whatever reason, feels compelled to make Beau aware of the truth, until she doesn't.
I'll kill you!
Which shows us that even when Beau has a mother figure trying to look out for him with good intentions for the first time in his life, it's not long before she defaults to the only kind of motherly quote-unquote love he's ever known.
I see you now!
But there's certainly something to be said about a kind and inviting suburban family that harbors some seriously malicious darkness beneath their warm exterior.
I thought we'd have a little goodbye barbecue before we hit the road.
these suburbanites are constantly trying to keep the chaos at bay.
Okay. He's laughing! He's laughing! All under control.
Doing their best to stick to the script and not acknowledge the subjugating system they're operating within. Meanwhile, their hormonal teenager has little interest in participating in the facade.
I'm taking you home.
What about Roger taking me?
Who the f*** do you think told me to take you?
And this notion links us right back to both Hereditary and Midsommar, which also both feature characters who are welcoming and seemingly well-intentioned before their twisted and ill-intentioned truths are revealed. In Midsommar, this is, of course, the cult that invites the American students to experience their unique ways of living, to understand their cultural traditions that may seem just a little bit foreign to them.
F*** this! You're f***ed!
Before it's understood far too late in the game that they couldn't give a damn about building cultural bridges out of kindness. They just needed some outsiders for their f***ed up cult shit. Same goes for Hereditary when Annie meets Joan, who approaches Annie as a friend, someone who can relate to the horrible tragedy she's been through.
My son died. If you need someone to talk to, because we all do.
Okay.
She even provides Annie with hope that her connection to her deceased daughter isn't lost forever. That with her super kind helpfulness, she can teach Annie how to communicate with her daughter through a seance. But of course, she too is only using Annie and her family for the super uncool cult she's secretly a part of. What a drag. All these characters in all these movies have a wholesome familial appeal. They offer a deep, heartfelt connection at a time when they know the main characters thirst for it most. But it's all a manipulative veneer used to trick them for their own gain. And when we get to Beau is Afraid, the concealed, menacing nature of the Suburbanites can be sensed from the get-go in a much more overt and uncomfortable way than in Hereditary or Midsommar. Yet another example of Aster taking a core concept from his first two movies and exaggerating it to a point of radical comedic absurdity in this one.
We call ourselves the Orphans of the Forest.
We like to blur the line between the audience and the players.
We put on a big show!
Out of the four distinctly separate acts of the movie, Beau escaping into the forest is the one section where we actually get to see him leave Mona's hostile simulation for a little bit, where he takes a detour from the deterministic train track he's on and discovers some for real, kind, and empathetic people. Leaving behind the decaying city streets and the artificial bubble of suburban life all under a watchful authoritarian control, Beau enters into a natural world where people enjoy things with authenticity and passion and are good to each other, seemingly without any need for Mona's societal luxuries. It's the first time we see anyone greeting Beau with legitimate kindness and empathy.
This is Beau.
Hi, Beau. Hi, Beau.
Hi, Beau. He was in an accident. Both his parents are dead.
No. Are you okay? That's terrible.
Which makes us consider, perhaps this is where Beau belongs, with the orphans of the forest, with other misfits like him, a place he can comfortably call home. But circling back to the whole movie being one big punchline of a hero's journey, where there's no hope on this irreversible ride that will always end with Beau's demise, the shadowy stage actors practicing their scenes just before the show foreshadows this quite heavily.
Damn these crossroads! How can one stake one's life on a choice between two unmarked paths? Or might they both lead home, where I can take my rightful seat, be lord of my own possessions?
There's an illusion of choice here. The actors talk of two paths, one a trap and the other an opportunity. But Beau's life isn't like the great stories of hope. There is no secondary path. There is no choice. A quick moment later, we hear trumpet sound. Then the actors rehearse a line that much more accurately echoes Beau's journey.
As great trumpets speak, our poor hero realizes too late. But these are funeral horns!
And we'll eventually come to hear these same funeral horns again just before his execution in the final scene. In the grander scheme, the forest section would be the part in the epic where the hero is renewed with the hope they need, where they begin to realize the potential of who they could be. But here, it's only false hope, a brief period where the mouse thinks it sees the light at the end of the maze. With Beau's tour guide in the forest, Penelope, he follows the lead of the first and only woman in his life to show him compassion and provide helpful assistance. At one point, he gives her the gift he originally meant to bring to his mother, a miniature version of the much larger statue in front of Mona's home. After accepting it, she wraps her fingers around the small trinket's head, symbolizing that Mona's firm grasp over Beau can perhaps be replaced with a gentler touch that makes Mona's influence appear small and insignificant in relation. Likewise, this guy appears to maybe potentially be Beau's father, dangling a carrot of expectation that as one parent exits Beau's life, this long-thought lost one could return as a more positive influence. But though Beau was able to wander off course for a bit, he was always on a leash that would eventually yank him back in line. The good people of the forest, Beau's maybe father, it all gets unceremoniously exploded to shit, sending Beau right back into that inescapable simulation. Of course, we can't not talk about how that whole papier-mâché play dealio fits into all this as well. As Beau begins watching the stage play, he becomes hypnotically immersed. The anguish and devastating loss of the main hero speaks to him profoundly.
With my mother and father gone, I have lost my whole self!
Until he literally sees himself as the hero. Of course, this projection has all sorts of subtle parallels to Beau's actual journey, but in this more rose-colored version, hope seems to prevail in even the worst of conditions. Here he has actual agency over his life. He finds love, which in Beau's reality is only allowed to happen under Mona's thumb. He makes children, which Mother also deems to be a big no-no. But most of all, when fate hits Beau with its worst, despite taking a lifetime, he pushes ever onward until he finally reunites with his long-lost sons. Meanwhile, Beau's real-life story isn't fated to end with quite as much purpose. What this whole play within an even larger play seems to be alluding to is the false illusion storytelling has the power to incept us with. Whether through a book, a play, a movie, or even religion, story structure provides a framework to help us make sense of our reality. When we watch a hero suffer through hardship, we see ourselves in that suffering. When the hero toughens through that hardship and perseveres, we recognize our own capacity for perseverance. And when the hero arrives at the end of the story, whether they survive or not, there's often a bigger meaning that we can extract and apply to our own lives. As we know all too well at this point, there isn't even the slightest sliver of hope for Beau. Thus, the movie's showing us that even when Beau steps out of Mona's matrix, he's just trading one manipulation in for another. Only here, it's not some great and powerful authority tricking him, it's his own imagination. His own desire to be great and courageous that's blurring the truth of his actual reality and giving him false hope. The vibrant stage play section imparts that art, stories, religion, they all appeal to our need to believe that our lives add up to something of worth. In reality, however, they're only providing us with an immersive delusion, a comforting escape. And in a meta sense, the play also warps us out of reality for a bit in the same way it does Beau. Because when Figment Beau spends his whole life searching for his family, only to find his children right at the end of it, there's a highly dramatic and tearful reunion.
I've looked for you for so long. Oh.
And we too can't help but feel emotionally captured by this long-awaited, equal parts joyous and sorrowful reacquainting. Locking us tightly into the present, until we remember this isn't the same character we've been invested in all this time. Just as Beau remembers, he's not the fictitious version of himself with all this agency and adventure. He's just another person escaping, if only for a short time, a cold existence he can never truly be released from. Beau is Afraid is, in essence, Aster giving us his closing statement on the thematic architecture he began constructing in Hereditary and Midsommar, only to show us how he really feels by blowing it all to shit in clown makeup while laughing maniacally at our mouth-breathing faces.
He's laughing! He's laughing!
Rather than display any developmental maturity or growth from his initial perspective on determinism and inherited familial horrors, Aster keeps it as hilariously cynical as can be because, simply put, that's clearly how he sees it.
Don't try to figure it out. It's stupid.
And while watching Beau can be a downright exhausting, and for many, even frustrating experience, there's something to be said about sticking to the guns of an authentic vision despite knowing how quick to rejection the majority of audiences will be. In an age of algorithmic inauthenticity, where pleasing an audience all too often trumps a purely personal perspective, Beau is Afraid is the punk rock movie that knows you'll probably hate it and snickers to itself as it invites you to go right on ahead. Because the point is to force you to look at the moment we're living in through a duct taped to your face pair of Kafka goggles, the sum sensory total of which is a very broadly painted picture of everything sucks, capitalism is becoming a parody of itself, Society is finding disturbing delight in puritanical judgment, anxiety is festering, hostility is everywhere, absurdity is abundant, and it all feels like we're headed straight for an irreversible collision. And by engaging with this bleakly absurdified view of the world, the takeaway doesn't necessarily need to be crawl into fetal position and insert thumb into mouth, because this movie is first and foremost a psychological look into the internal world of one man, an immersion so deep into his viewpoint that the external world becomes one big metaphorical reflection of all that he knows. And by being in the reality of such a hurt and taken advantage of person, perhaps there's opportunity to learn and better understand just how powerfully destructive guilt can be, how it can follow us like a shadow, how it can drench our entire waking life in paranoia, and how it can ultimately mean the end of all hope.
How long have you two been together?
Just over 3.5 years.
4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
I was most excited for you to come.